On a dusty Texas highway, a desperate cry pierced the silence, forcing Emily to choose: turn away or risk everything for a dying wild kitten. That single act of mercy set off a storm. Neighbors turned into judges, the law closed in, and her home became a battleground for hope. How far would you go to save a life when compassion is a crime? Where are you watching from? If you believe courage means standing up for the voiceless, like and subscribe for more stories where love defies the odds. Late afternoon in central Texas holds a peculiar kind of stillness. Warm, dusty light slanting through the oaks, cicadas screaming from the brush, and the long road west of Austin humming beneath the wheels of trucks bound for somewhere else. For Emily Saunders, that Sunday had begun with the simple intention of running errands before dark, maybe picking up takeout for dinner. Nothing more. The heat pressed on the windshield as she and Daniel, her partner, drove back toward their quiet neighborhood. They hardly spoke, the silence between them filled with the comfortable exhaustion that comes from living just a little too much life in a week. Emily watched the sky, streaked pink and violet, the color of an old bruise fading into dusk. Daniel had his hand on the wheel, his mind miles away, the engine's soft growl the only sound. But then, in that ordinary silence, something pierced, a sharp, desperate cry, thin as glass, nearly drowned by the rush of passing traffic. It was the sort of sound you could almost pretend you hadn't heard. Just a trick of the wind, maybe a bird, maybe nothing. But the way Emily's heart skipped told her otherwise. She peered through the fading light, squinting as they passed beneath a crooked streetlight. There, by the side of the road, nearly lost in shadow, a tiny, ragged figure flinched each time a truck roared by. "Stop," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's foot hit the brake out of instinct more than understanding. They pulled to the shoulder, the hazard lights flickering weakly in the twilight. Both of them stared for a moment, letting the reality settle in. Lying there, trembling, was a bobcat kitten, barely bigger than a house cat, its coat matted with dust and streaked with blood. Its breath came in shallow, ragged pulls. With each passing gust from another speeding semi, its tiny body pressed lower against the ground, as if bracing for oblivion. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline and helplessness all at once. The world seemed to narrow to that single, fragile life, caught between the uncaring world of humans and the indifferent wilderness pressing in on the edges of town. She stepped out of the car, ignoring Daniel's warning, boots crunching gravel as she knelt beside the little creature. Up close, the injuries were worse. Gashes along its side, an ear torn, eyes glazed with shock and pain. Emily could see the fear in its wild gaze, the way it tensed, ready to lash out or bolt despite its obvious weakness. A wave of conflicting thoughts crashed through her mind. This was a wild animal, a protected species, a living remnant of the world before highways and neighborhoods took over. Picking it up, touching it, even being this close was probably against the law. She knew the stories. People fined, animals euthanized, well-meaning rescuers branded as criminals. The rules were strict, the consequences harsh. Walk away, and the kitten would surely die. Crushed under tires or claimed by hunger, no one would know or care. But Emily couldn't look away. In her mind, she pictured the worst: headlights, the sickening thump, silence. She looked at Daniel, saw the hesitation written on his face. He knew the risks as well as she did. But she also saw something else. A flicker of hope, of reckless, stubborn defiance. She pulled off her jacket, heart pounding and slowly draped it over the kitten. It flinched, but was too weak to fight. Carefully, she lifted it, feeling the strange mix of wild heat and shivering frailty against her skin. Daniel unlocked the passenger door wordlessly, watching the road for witnesses, hands shaking as he reached for his phone. Back in the car, the world seemed to hold its breath. The kitten's breathing grew shallower, the blood soaking through the thin fabric. Emily fumbled for her phone, searching for wildlife rescue numbers, animal control, anything. She called one after another, her voice growing hoarse with urgency. Every answer was the same. "We can't help. That's a wild bobcat. It's illegal." Over and over, rejection. The world's answer to suffering was red tape and risk avoidance. Daniel kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting the police to pull up at any moment. "Emily, we should just," he began. But the words died on his tongue as he saw the determination set in her jaw. Emily pressed her hand to the kitten's side, willing it to live, refusing to let fear be the final decision. As they pulled away from the roadside, Emily looked back once, seeing the spot where a life would have ended, forgotten. Now, the weight of that life lay in her lap, a secret, a promise and a crime all at once. The city lights blurred past as Daniel drove in silence, his grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. At home, the sense of trespass grew sharper. They sneaked the kitten inside, moving quietly, hearts racing, the whole world seeming to tilt with the enormity of what they'd done. Emily set the bundle down on a soft towel in the laundry room. Daniel fetched water and the first aid kit, hands trembling as he opened the bottle. Every moment felt stolen, every second precious. As the kitten struggled for breath, Emily's mind raced through possibilities. Could they keep her alive until morning? Should they risk another call for help? Or would every action just make things worse? She sat beside the kitten through the night, watching the rise and fall of its chest, counting the breaths, feeling the wild, tenuous thread that now bound her life to this tiny, battered creature. The sun crept over the horizon, turning the world gold and pink. Emily had not slept, her mind a knot of fear, hope, and responsibility. In the silence, the little bobcat's breathing deepened, the wounds still angry, but no longer bleeding. A faint glimmer of life, a promise that hope might yet be enough. But as the first trucks rumbled past their house, Emily knew there would be consequences for mercy. The night passed in uneasy fragments. Emily hovered between hope and dread, unable to rest even as exhaustion pulled at her. In the small laundry room, the bobcat kitten clung stubbornly to life. Emily watched as the creature's tiny chest heaved, thin fur matted with dried blood, one paw twitching fitfully. Outside, the world carried on with indifference. Headlights sweeping by, the distant chorus of coyotes rising and falling in the darkness. Inside, everything felt changed. The simple act of mercy had redrawn the boundaries of Emily and Daniel's quiet existence. Morning brought little comfort. Daniel slipped into the room, jaw tight, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. For a moment he just stood there watching the kitten, wrestling with the silent knowledge that they were now on the wrong side of the law. Emily dipped a soft rag into a bowl of warm water, gently cleaning around the worst wounds. The kitten whimpered and tried to pull away, but she persisted, whispering wordless encouragement, determined not to let fear paralyze her. By sunrise, they both knew this was more than a night's adventure. Emily's phone screen was still open to a string of rejected calls, wildlife centers, animal control, even the local vet. The answer had been the same every time. Wild bobcat. No permit. No help. Each time she pressed the number, hope drained a little further. She could almost hear the invisible line being drawn. Help the kitten and become a criminal, or do nothing and let it die. It was an impossible choice for anyone who believed that compassion ought to matter. As the day brightened, Emily mixed a weak solution of kitten formula, drop by painstaking drop. Daniel improvised a feeding syringe. Each attempt was a battle. The bobcat, despite her injuries, was all claws and wild panic. But Emily's persistence won out. With a trembling sigh, the kitten accepted the liquid, swallowing enough to ease the hollowness in her belly. They named her Ash for the gray flecks in her fur and the way she'd risen, barely, from what should have been her end. By noon, a fragile calm seemed to settle. Ash slept, curled into a trembling ball on the towel. Emily and Daniel sat on the kitchen floor, legs stretched out, both covered in scratches and uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed maybe things would be okay. Emily even let herself imagine what might come next. Finding a legal rescue, convincing someone to help, maybe even nursing Ash back to health and releasing her someday. For that hour, hope felt possible. But hope is fickle, and wild things do not heal by will alone. As the afternoon sun crept across the linoleum, Ash's body suddenly seized, convulsions rocking her fragile frame. She arched and twisted, claws raking the towel. Emily lunged to restrain her, but the kitten's wild terror was stronger. In one frantic moment, Ash slashed Daniel's hand, opening a deep gash. Blood spattered the tiles. Daniel recoiled in shock, pain radiating up his arm. Ash hissed, retreating into the corner, body shuddering with every ragged breath. The sense of calm shattered in an instant. Emily's heart hammered, fear crowding out every other thought. She pressed a towel to Daniel's bleeding hand, hands shaking as she tried to stop the flow. Ash's cries echoed through the house, each sound a reminder that she was a wild animal, dangerous despite her size. Compassion, Emily realized, came with sharp edges. Saving Ash might mean risking more than the law. It might mean risking themselves. With Daniel's wound cleaned and bandaged, Emily wiped tears from her face and paced the hallway, trying to think. They were in over their heads. She dialed the local veterinary office, voice barely steady. The receptionist's tone was cool, almost apologetic. No, the vet would not see a wild bobcat, especially not one kept without a permit. Emily pleaded, but the answer did not change. "It's against the law," the voice insisted, as if that were the end of it. Daniel leaned against the wall, hand throbbing, anger and fear warring in his eyes. "Emily, we can't keep this up. What if—" He didn't finish. The question lingered in the air, heavier than any answer. In the hours that followed, the tension in the house became suffocating. Every shadow at the window, every knock at the door made their hearts race. Emily found herself peering through blinds, checking the street, certain someone had noticed. The world outside seemed colder, less forgiving, as if the very air carried the threat of punishment. Yet even as fear gnawed at her, Emily refused to give in. She hovered by Ash's side, cleaning wounds, offering formula, learning the rhythms of wild need and fragile trust. She tried to coax Ash into comfort, though the kitten's eyes remained wary, always searching for escape. Daniel moved through the house like a ghost, tending to his injury, hands always shaking. As dusk returned, Emily carried Ash onto the screened porch, hoping fresh air might bring relief. The evening breeze rustled the leaves, filling the space with the scent of summer rain and dust. Ash pressed herself against Emily's side, fur bristling at every sound. Emily looked up at the endless Texas sky, wondering how one small life could bring so much upheaval, how a single act of mercy could change everything. That night, as Emily lay awake listening to Ash's uneven breathing, she realized they'd passed the point of no return. There was no undoing what had been done, so compassion had drawn a line in the sand, and on the other side waited consequences neither of them could predict. Emily closed her eyes, holding Ash close, her heart aching with the knowledge that love for the wild always carried a price. The first days with Ash brought a fragile rhythm to Emily and Daniel's lives, a rhythm measured in the careful drip of formula and the slow knitting of wounds. The kitten's breathing steadied, her sides rising and falling with less effort. She nestled deeper into her bed of old towels, thin ribs barely visible beneath the tangled gray fur. Hope edged back into the house, tentative and uncertain, as Emily dared to believe she'd done the right thing. Days blurred together, marked by soft routines, cleaning Ash's wounds, mixing formula, tracking the faint return of energy to those wild golden eyes. Emily and Daniel took turns with the night watch, listening for each raspy breath, counting heartbeats in the darkness. Outside, the world spun on as usual. Neighbors mowed their lawns. Delivery vans came and went. Children's laughter drifted over the fences. Inside, everything revolved around the kitten's survival, a secret life hidden from the world. Emily found herself studying Ash's every movement, searching for signs of progress. Each time Ash managed a few steps on her own, Emily's chest swelled with relief. The kitten's trust was a brittle thing. She sometimes let Emily's hand linger on her back, other times recoiled with a hiss, the wildness never far from the surface. Even Daniel, who'd tried to keep a safe distance, softened each night as he watched Emily coax Ash to eat, murmuring gentle encouragements. A cautious optimism took root, but peace was a delicate, deceptive guest. On the third night, with thunder grumbling far out on the prairie and the air thick with summer's weight, a sudden crisis erupted. Emily woke to the sound of claws scrabbling against the walls. Rushing to the laundry room, she found Ash writhing on the floor, her small body racked with violent convulsions. The kitten's legs kicked aimlessly, eyes rolling back, foam flecking her mouth. Panic surged through Emily as she tried to cradle Ash, desperate to soothe her. The kitten twisted and thrashed, lashing out with razor-sharp claws. In a flurry of movement, Ash caught Daniel's hand with a deep, slashing swipe. Blood welled up instantly, bright against his pale skin. Daniel bit back a curse, grabbing a towel to staunch the flow. But the shock in his eyes told Emily everything. This was not a pet, but a wild creature clinging to life and lashing out at the unfamiliar. For a moment, Emily faltered. What if Ash carried disease? What if Daniel's wound became infected? Or worse? Compassion and common sense collided in her mind, churning up every worry she'd tried to ignore. But there was no time to second guess. Ash's seizures slowed, her body going limp and shivering with exhaustion. Emily rocked her gently, murmuring apologies and promises she could not be sure she could keep. Daniel wrapped his hand in gauze, jaw clenched tight, frustration boiling beneath the surface. They cleaned Ash's wounds once more, working in tense silence, each breath heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Daniel's injury was a fresh reminder. Ash was not a domesticated animal, not a grateful rescue, but a wild thing whose nature was not easily tamed. The night crawled by, each hour measured in fearful glances and whispered reassurances. Emily found herself second-guessing every choice. She replayed the scene on the roadside 1,000 times, asking herself if mercy had been a mistake, if her desire to save Ash had doomed them all to a much harder fate. But each time she watched the kitten sleep, saw her chest rising with slow, even breaths, she clung to hope, however foolish it felt. By morning, the house felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Emily tried once again to call the nearest vet, her voice tight with desperation. This time, the answer was colder, more direct. "We can't treat wild bobcats. It's illegal. I'm sorry." The words echoed, flat and final. Daniel muttered about calling animal control, but Emily shook her head, unable to imagine handing Ash over to strangers who saw only a problem to be removed. Tension lingered through the day as Daniel's hand throbbed and Ash refused to eat. Emily coaxed, pleaded, tried every trick she knew. But the kitten turned away, curled up tightly as if shutting out the world. The sense of calm they'd fought so hard to build was shattered, replaced by anxiety that gnawed at Emily's resolve. As dusk fell, Emily took Ash outside, cradled in a blanket, hoping that the fresh air might spark her appetite. The kitten blinked at the breeze, nose twitching, eyes narrowed against the evening light. For a few minutes, it seemed as if something shifted. Ash sniffed the air, licked at Emily's finger, then finally accepted a few drops of formula. Relief flooded Emily, thin and fleeting, but real. For tonight, at least, Ash would live. But beneath the fragile peace, Emily sensed a storm gathering, of law, of nature, of consequence. The world beyond their walls was indifferent to mercy, blind to hope, and ready to pounce on mistakes. She held Ash a little tighter as the wind picked up, knowing their sanctuary could not last forever. In the weeks that followed, the pattern repeated. Brief moments of hope, shattered by sudden crises. Ash's health wavered. Daniel's patience wore thin. Emily's conviction was tested again and again. Each day brought new uncertainty, but also a growing bond. Against the odds, Ash survived, the wildness in her eyes undiminished. Emily wondered, not for the first time, what price she would ultimately pay for choosing mercy over caution, love over law. And as night closed in once more, she whispered a silent promise to the sleeping kitten. Whatever storm came next, they would face it together. For a brief moment, the world seemed to allow Emily and Daniel a reprieve. Days stretched into a routine governed by the fragile needs of the wild creature sleeping in their home. Ash's wounds gradually began to close, the dullness in her eyes giving way to a sharp, wary alertness. Though the seizures had passed, a tension remained in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that their fragile arrangement could collapse at any second. Yet, for all Emily's devotion and Daniel's uneasy cooperation, a new, colder fear crept into their lives. The fear of being discovered. The truth hovered between them every morning as they listened for footsteps on the porch or a knock at the door, both dreading the consequences of the choice they had made on that roadside. The day the tension finally snapped began unremarkably. Emily spent the morning cleaning Ash's makeshift bed, humming softly, hoping the sound would comfort the wild creature. Daniel, his hand now a mosaic of healing cuts, busied himself with chores that seemed designed to distract him from the growing sense of peril. The outside world pressed in from every window. Emily kept glancing at the curtains, watching for any unfamiliar car, any neighbor's curious gaze. That afternoon, the uneasy silence was shattered. A sharp rapping on the door sent a surge of panic through Emily's chest. For a heartbeat, neither she nor Daniel moved. The knock came again, louder this time, demanding attention. Emily's mind raced. Had someone seen them? Had the endless parade of phone calls tipped off the authorities? Daniel opened the door to find a man in uniform, a private vet, not the official she'd feared, but still a stranger with the weight of the law in his eyes. Emily explained as best she could, her words tumbling over each other, desperate for understanding. The vet's face remained impassive as he listened, his gaze flicking to the closed door of the laundry room where Ash lay hidden. He shook his head slowly. "Keeping a wild bobcat is illegal. I'm sorry. I can't help you." The words dropped into the space between them like stones. Emily tried to protest, to explain that this was a matter of life and death. But the man's expression did not soften. He left as quickly as he had come, the unspoken threat of consequences trailing after him. Daniel closed the door, his shoulders sagging with defeat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Emily sat on the floor, staring at her hands, the weight of the law pressing down with a suffocating inevitability. They had crossed a line, and now there was no help to be found. Not from the authorities, not from professionals, not from anyone who saw the world only in black and white. They moved through the next hours in a daze, afraid to draw attention, afraid to hope. But the world beyond their walls was not so easily ignored. That evening, as Emily sat on the back steps with Ash nestled in her lap, a flash of movement across the street caught her eye. A neighbor stood in their yard, phone raised, snapping a photo. Emily felt her stomach drop, dread blooming inside her. The neighbor's expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and judgment. By nightfall, Emily's worst fears began to crystallize. Her phone buzzed with notifications. A photo of her cradling Ash had been posted online, the caption a mixture of speculation and accusation. The post spread quickly, comments piling up in a feverish debate. Some voices called her reckless, a danger to the community. Others praised her compassion, defending her actions as brave and selfless. But the truth was lost in the noise. Emily realized the situation had spiraled out of control, their secret now public, their safety in question. As darkness settled, another shock awaited. Emily discovered a folded slip of paper jammed beneath the front door. Her hands shook as she read the hastily typed warning from a wildlife officer. "Keeping wild animals without a permit is a criminal offense. This is your first and only warning. If you are found with the animal again, it will be seized and euthanized." The words struck like a physical blow. Emily pressed Ash close, the kitten tense and watchful in her arms, and felt the full weight of fear and helplessness. The sanctuary she had built was crumbling, threatened by forces she could neither predict nor control. Daniel's face was grim as he read the note. There were no words left, only a silent, shared terror for the fate of the wild creature they had come to love. That night, Emily slept fitfully, haunted by visions of men in uniforms, flashing lights, and empty cages. Each sound outside the window became a threat, every passing car a harbinger of disaster. She clung to Ash, whispering promises she might not be able to keep, her heart raw with the knowledge that the consequences of compassion could be as sharp as any claw. In the darkness, she resolved that whatever came next, she would fight. For Ash, for the right to choose mercy over indifference, for the wildness in herself that refused to surrender. Morning sunlight filtered through closed blinds, casting striped shadows across the kitchen where Emily sat, numb from another sleepless night. Ash nestled on her lap, wild eyes half closed, oblivious to the mounting pressure from a world determined to claim her. Emily scrolled through her phone, reading every new comment, every fresh accusation and word of support. Her life dissected by strangers, her intentions distorted and debated. The warning from the wildlife officer still sat on the table, the single sheet of paper weighing more than all the guilt she'd ever known. Fear and shame warred with stubborn hope inside her. Daniel kept to himself, moving quietly from room to room, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes averted. The house was charged with an electric anxiety. Anytime a car slowed in front of their driveway, Emily's breath caught. Each ring of the phone sent a jolt through her spine. It seemed the whole world was watching, waiting to see what she would do next. But as the storm swirled, a new voice entered the conversation, a local animal welfare group, their message both a relief and a new source of dread. They offered to help Ash, promising to take the kitten and do what's right. Emily researched them late into the night, her mind whirring with suspicion. Articles and angry posts revealed a pattern. The group was known for turning wild animal rescues into publicity stunts, exploiting both people and creatures for their own gain. Emily read stories of rescued animals paraded for cameras, then quietly disposed of or neglected once the attention faded. She felt the familiar sting of betrayal, that particular ache that comes when the systems meant to help only serve themselves. Daniel suggested giving in, just to be safe, but Emily's gut twisted at the thought of Ash, small, wild, and trusting, becoming a pawn in someone else's game. For the first time since the roadside, Emily felt a surge of clarity. She could not control public opinion, nor bend the law to her will, but she could fight for Ash on her own terms. That morning, Emily made her choice. She opened her laptop and began drafting paperwork, researching Texas wildlife permits, learning the complicated legal path to keep Ash safe and cared for. She read stories of ordinary people who'd fought the system, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but always refusing to surrender what mattered most. Each new piece of information felt like a weapon forged in the fire of adversity. Daniel, seeing her resolve, helped where he could, though his doubts hung in the air like a summer storm on the horizon. Their first step was building a proper enclosure. Emily raided her savings account, and Daniel dipped into his emergency fund. They drove across town, loading sheets of steel mesh, sturdy locks, and heavy posts into the back of their car, each purchase a declaration of intent. The project consumed their days and emptied their bank accounts. Under the hot sun, they worked side by side, sweat soaking their shirts, hands blistered and raw. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, and passing cars slowed to stare. The drama of the Bobcat people, now a local spectacle. Ash watched them from a patch of shade, golden eyes always alert, never fully relaxed. She was growing stronger, muscles filling out, wounds now pink scars. She studied Emily as much as Emily studied her, a silent exchange of trust and wild uncertainty. Once the skeleton of the enclosure was set in the backyard, Emily filed the first round of permit applications, submitting every form, every document, every shred of proof she could muster. The bureaucracy was a thicket of red tape. Delays, fees, obscure regulations, and cold, impersonal letters. Some nights, Emily sat awake, staring at rejection emails and warning notices, her courage flickering like a candle in the wind. But the fight had changed her. For the first time since finding Ash, Emily no longer felt powerless. Each setback was a challenge to be overcome. Each obstacle, a lesson in persistence. She contacted animal rights lawyers, read wildlife statutes, even joined online groups for exotic animal caregivers. Daniel's skepticism softened as he saw her determination. His own fear transformed into quiet, practical support. Still, the world outside did not make it easy. On the day the enclosure was nearly finished, another blow landed. Neighbors circulated a petition demanding the removal of Ash from the neighborhood, citing safety and legality. Emily's phone lit up with hostile messages, threats, and warnings. One afternoon, a county inspector appeared unannounced, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and unsympathetic. Emily hid Ash in a storage room, heart racing as she led the inspector through the house, answering questions with practiced calm. The inspector left with a non-committal nod, the uncertainty deepening instead of lifting. That night, as thunderheads gathered on the horizon, Emily stood in the backyard beside the steel enclosure, Ash by her feet. Lightning flickered in the distance, thunder rolling low and dangerous. The fight for Ash was far from over, but Emily felt a new strength rising inside her, a conviction that true compassion wasn't just about saving a life in a moment of crisis. It was about standing firm in the face of fear, fighting for what was right even when the world demanded surrender. The storm would come. The struggle would continue. But Emily was no longer simply reacting to disaster. She was making a stand, building a future, and choosing, again and again, to fight for the wild heart she had rescued. The backyard transformed into a construction zone, each day beginning before sunrise and ending long after the Texas sun slipped behind the live oaks. Emily and Daniel worked side by side, sweat-soaked and exhausted, muscles aching with each stroke of the hammer and twist of the drill. The steel mesh enclosure slowly took shape, stubbornly standing against both the physical world and the tide of opposition rising all around them. Every swing of the mallet, every post sunk into the clay, was a small defiance, evidence that they would not surrender Ash to fate or bureaucracy. Ash prowled the perimeter, watching her new world grow from chaos. The enclosure, designed with safety and comfort in mind, sprawled over a corner of the yard, reinforced against escape and intrusion alike. There were logs to climb, shaded corners to hide in, and soft dirt for digging. To outsiders, it looked like an overbuilt pen, but to Emily, it was a fortress, a promise to protect a life that refused to fit into neat human boxes. As days blurred into weeks, the cost mounted. Their savings withered, devoured by receipts for supplies, permit application fees, and legal consultations. Daniel returned to his freelance work in the evenings, his focus broken by worry. Emily juggled part-time jobs, fielding phone calls from lawyers and wildlife officials in the back room while keeping her anxiety hidden from Ash. But the world outside did not relent. Neighbors' stares grew bolder, and the online vitriol intensified, a ceaseless storm of accusation and judgment. Then, just as hope seemed within reach, another crisis hit. The petition against them, signed by dozens of neighbors, forced the county to act. Early one morning, Emily opened the door to find a pair of officials standing on the porch, one with a clipboard, the other in a county-issued vest. The inspection was unannounced, the questions pointed and relentless. Emily, heart pounding, guided them through the house, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. She'd hidden Ash in the storage room behind boxes of holiday decorations, whispering assurances that felt paper-thin. The officials scrutinized every detail: the locks on the windows, the fence line, the food containers, even the placement of litter and towels. Emily kept her answers brief, trying to project calm and competence, but her hands trembled as she signed the inspection form. When they finally left, she collapsed on the floor beside Ash's hiding place, relief and terror mingling in her veins. The county did not issue an immediate verdict. Instead, they suspended the permit application, citing public concern and pending investigation. That afternoon, as if summoned by the scent of drama, local reporters began circling. Cameras flashed from the curb, microphones hovered, eager for a soundbite. One reporter shouted questions over the fence, his voice cutting through the sticky heat. "Are you the woman keeping a wild bobcat in a residential neighborhood?" Emily ignored them, lips pressed tight, praying Ash would remain unseen. But Ash, curious and emboldened by her recovery, almost ruined everything. One afternoon, as Emily darted outside to collect groceries, she glanced back just in time to see Ash slip through the cracked screen door, golden eyes fixed on the strangers at the fence. Emily lunged, scooping the kitten into her arms as the cameras clicked. For a split second, the world seemed to pause. Emily's breath held, the reporter's attention razor-sharp, Ash tensing for escape. Somehow, she managed to slip back inside before disaster struck, heart pounding as she realized how thin the line was between sanctuary and exposure. Through it all, Emily refused to give up. She sent new letters to the county, gathered support from online groups, and redoubled her efforts to finish the enclosure. Daniel patched holes in the mesh, reinforced every seam, their teamwork wordless but essential. The enclosure became a symbol of their struggle, imperfect, battered, but unbroken. Then, just as they neared completion, nature itself intervened. On a humid afternoon, the sky darkened with little warning. Clouds rolled in, heavy and menacing, and the wind picked up with sudden, brutal force. Emily rushed outside to secure loose tools, but the storm arrived faster than she could react. Rain hammered the yard, transforming the dirt into rivers of mud. The wind screamed through the trees, twisting branches and tearing at anything not nailed down. A gust lifted the newly built roof of the enclosure and hurled it across the yard. Metal shrieked and snapped. Ash, caught by the chaos, bolted from cover, claws skittering on the wet ground. Emily shouted and sprinted after her, slipping in the muck, desperation propelling her forward. The enclosure, months of work and sacrifice, lay in ruins, its promise of safety shattered in minutes. That night, Emily sat on the kitchen floor, soaked and muddy, Ash huddled in her lap. Daniel joined her, exhaustion etched deep in his face. The room was silent, but for the storm's retreating growl. Everything they had built seemed on the verge of collapse. Money gone, permit suspended, neighbors hostile, the enclosure a broken dream. Yet, as Emily stroked Ash's damp fur, she felt a stubborn thread of hope hold fast inside her. The world might throw every obstacle in their path, but she was not done fighting. Tomorrow she would start again, rebuilding, reapplying, refusing to abandon the wild heart that had become her own. The night after the storm passed was a restless one. The wind had left everything changed. The backyard was a field of scattered metal and broken dreams. The enclosure a skeleton of bent posts and shredded mesh. Rainwater pooled beneath the porch and seeped through the cracked garage window. Emily lay awake, the exhaustion in her body outweighed only by the dread in her heart. She kept replaying the moment the roof ripped away, the chaos of chasing Ash through the mud, the feeling of everything she'd built slipping through her fingers. Dawn brought a weak, watery light that revealed the extent of the destruction. Emily, muscles aching and fingers still raw, pulled on her boots and stepped into the debris-strewn yard. Daniel was already there, wordlessly gathering what could be salvaged. They worked side by side, barely speaking, focused on clearing the mess and comforting Ash, who moved with wary caution through the ruins of her sanctuary. For the first time, Emily saw real fear in Ash's eyes. The kitten kept close, darting from shadow to shadow, ears pinned and tail low, uncertain where safety lay. The storm had shaken something loose inside her, a reminder that the world could change in a heartbeat, that trust and shelter were fragile things. By midday, the oppressive heat returned, steaming off the mud and raising the scent of rain-soaked earth. Emily's shirt clung to her skin as she rebuilt, her mind moving in slow, stubborn circles. How much longer could they fight? How many more setbacks could they survive before the world, or fate, forced her to surrender? That afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the far distance, Emily let Ash wander the backyard for fresh air. She kept a close watch, wary after the storm, but as she turned to lift a piece of twisted metal, she heard a panicked yowl, a wild, sharp cry that cut through the air and set her heart racing. Ash was gone. Emily dropped the metal and sprinted, scanning the tangled yard. She caught a glimpse of fur at the edge of the property, just where a break in the fence opened onto the thick brush and a deep, narrow ravine. Panic took hold. Ash, driven by fear and the call of the wild, darted through the gap and disappeared into the tangled undergrowth beyond. Without hesitation, Emily plunged after her, branches whipping at her arms and legs, her boots slipping in the mud. The ravine yawned ahead, a shallow creek swollen by the storm, its banks slick and crumbling. At the far edge, Ash clung to a narrow outcrop, her claws digging desperately into the mud as water rushed below. Emily skidded to a halt at the edge of the ravine, breath coming in ragged bursts, her eyes fixed on the wild animal she'd come to love. Ash's body trembled with exhaustion, the distance between them suddenly vast and impossible. The slope was slick, every step a risk, the ground threatening to give way at any moment. Emily called out, voice trembling with fear and hope. Ash turned her head, wild eyes meeting Emily's for a suspended heartbeat. Time seemed to pause. Emily on the edge, Ash poised over the rushing water, the gulf between them filled with uncertainty and trust. Instinct warred with reason. Emily knew she should step back, find help, avoid risking her own life for a creature the world deemed disposable. But something deeper took hold, an unwillingness to let go, a refusal to let fear win. Ignoring the sting of brambles and the throb in her knees, Emily crawled out onto the slick, narrow ledge, her hands sinking into the mud as she edged closer to Ash. Each inch felt like a battle against gravity, the bank threatening to crumble beneath her. Blood welled on her palms where sharp rocks sliced her skin, but she pressed on, never breaking eye contact with Ash. The kitten's breath came fast, her whole body trembling with the urge to flee. Emily stretched out her hand, palm open, voice soft but steady. For a moment the world hung in balance, one wild heart at the mercy of another's. Ash stared, torn between terror and the fragile thread of trust that had formed over weeks of struggle. Then, in a leap of faith, she launched herself into Emily's arms. The impact knocked Emily backward, sliding her down the muddy slope. She clutched Ash to her chest, twisting her body to shield the kitten from the worst of the fall. The earth gave way beneath them, and for a brief, breathless instant, they tumbled together down the ravine's edge. When they landed, Emily's arms were wrapped tight around Ash, her breath knocked out, but her spirit unbroken. Ash looked up, wide-eyed, then burrowed closer, trembling but alive. For a moment, Emily simply lay there in the mud, holding the wild creature that had become the heart of her fight. Blood trickled from her scraped hands, her body aching from the fall, but relief flooded her, raw, overwhelming, and bright as sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Slowly, Emily climbed the bank, cradling Ash close. The return journey was a blur of pain and determination. Daniel met her at the edge of the yard, eyes wide with fear and awe. Without a word, he took her elbow and helped her back to the house. Inside, Emily cleaned her wounds and wrapped Ash in a towel, her own hands shaking from adrenaline and relief. The kitten's heartbeat was rapid but steady, her golden eyes watchful, no longer wild with panic, but filled with a new, deeper trust. In that moment, Emily knew they had crossed another boundary, one not of law, but of loyalty and courage. Just whatever storms would come next, she and Ash would face them together. Trust, hard-won and costly, had triumphed over fear. The days after the storm and the ravine rescue passed in a daze, exhaustion saturating every hour. Emily's arms were a patchwork of bruises and scrapes, her palms bandaged, each movement a reminder of the price she'd paid to save Ash. The kitchen filled with the sharp scent of antiseptic and mud, and Daniel's steady hands worked in silence as he cleaned Emily's wounds and mixed strong coffee to keep them both awake. Neither spoke much. Words felt brittle, inadequate to contain everything they'd endured. The fear, the danger, the relief of a life preserved against impossible odds. The backyard was a testament to destruction. The enclosure, which had once stood as a fortress of hope, now slumped in ruin, panels twisted, mesh torn, the ground churned to muck by rain and panic. Daniel surveyed the damage with hollow eyes. Every plank and post had cost them something: time, money, sanity. And now it all seemed lost. His exhaustion ran deeper than muscle. It had settled into his bones. For Emily, the ruin was both a physical blow and a wound to her spirit. She found herself returning again and again to the back steps, staring at the remains of their labor, unable to muster the energy to rebuild. Inside, Ash recovered slowly. The ordeal had stripped her wildness down to raw nerve and bone, but she remained resilient. The kitten stuck close to Emily, following her from room to room, eyes wide and watchful. Gone was the trembling, half-starved creature from the roadside. In her place was an animal honed by adversity, battered but unbroken. Each day, Ash grew more alert, her steps more sure. Yet beneath the surface, she was changed. Less quick to lash out, but more cautious. A wildness still burning in her gaze, tempered by trust. Emily spent long hours beside Ash, nursing her back from the brink. She spooned formula into the kitten's mouth, dabbed wounds with gentle hands, whispered encouragement into the fur at her neck. The bond between them, forged in fear and defiance, became something unshakable. At night, Emily lay awake, watching Ash sleep, listening to her quiet breaths, grateful for each one. But the cost of compassion stretched far beyond the walls of their battered home. Their savings, already thin, had evaporated, poured into building supplies, veterinary bills, legal filings, and now the promise of starting again. Emily sorted through overdue notices and receipts, the weight of debt settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Daniel took on extra shifts and side work, pushing himself past exhaustion, coming home late with dirt beneath his nails and lines of fatigue etched across his face. Their lives became a blur of work and worry, sleep snatched in broken fragments, hope kindled and snuffed a dozen times a day. The fight had changed them. The house was filled with a quiet sort of grief, not just for the money lost, or for the physical pain, but for the innocence that had been stripped away. Emily found herself looking in the mirror and hardly recognizing the woman she saw. Older, sharper, eyes marked by sleepless nights and too many hard choices. Even Daniel, always steady, moved with a heaviness that spoke of things unsaid. And yet, even as loss piled on loss, there was no regret. The ruin in the yard, the lines on their faces, the emptiness of their bank account. These things became badges of their commitment, the visible cost of having refused to look away. Each time Emily saw Ash sunning herself on the windowsill or batting playfully at a thread of yarn, she felt a flicker of pride beneath the fatigue. Against everything, Ash had survived. Against a world that demanded obedience and indifference, they had chosen mercy and paid the price willingly. There were nights when the anxiety nearly broke them. Once, as Emily lay in the dark, Daniel's breathing ragged beside her, she listened to a distant siren and wondered if this would be the night someone came to take Ash away. She rehearsed her answers to every possible question, tried to imagine a future where they had to say goodbye. But the days passed, and the world, for a time, left them alone. The law's shadow never fully lifted, but it receded into the background. Another threat among many, less immediate than hunger or exhaustion. The enclosure, ruined by the storm, remained a scar on the landscape for weeks. Emily and Daniel were too tired, too depleted to rebuild right away. Their hands and hearts needed time to heal, and for a while survival was enough. Slowly, though, with the help of a few quietly supportive neighbors and online friends, they gathered the courage and resources to begin anew. They ordered supplies in small batches, rebuilt by increments, each nail driven home an act of hope reclaimed from despair. As the summer heat faded and the first hints of autumn colored the trees, Ash regained her strength. Her fur grew glossy, her eyes fierce once more. She watched Emily with a wary affection, never quite tame but no longer afraid. Their home was not as it once was, but it was filled with a quiet resilience, a sense that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had lost much: money, certainty, the illusion of safety. But what they had gained was something wilder and more enduring. Scars healed, debts would eventually be repaid, but the lesson etched into their hearts was one neither would ever forget. Some lives are worth saving, no matter the cost. As autumn crept quietly over central Texas, a new rhythm settled into Emily and Daniel's lives. The worst of the heat relented, giving way to cooler mornings and the occasional sweep of golden leaves drifting past their windows. The relentless chaos of the past months softened, replaced by a slower, steadier pulse. It was not peace exactly. There were still reminders of what they had endured, scars inside and out. But it was stability, born of endurance and hard lessons. The backyard, once a landscape of ruin, transformed again through dogged determination. With a handful of neighbors, those who had watched and, in the end, chosen compassion over suspicion, Emily and Daniel rebuilt the enclosure. This time, they reinforced every corner, buried wire deep to thwart Ash's occasional escape attempts, and added climbing posts, rocks, and branches that mimicked the wild terrain from which Ash had come. Each hammer swing, each beam placed and secured, was an act of faith, a declaration that even in a world hostile to wildness, it was possible to create a small sanctuary. Their permit, delayed for months, finally came through on a brittle, sunny afternoon in late October. Emily opened the letter at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she read the official approval stamped in bureaucratic ink. Ash Haven, the document called it, a licensed private wildlife rescue and sanctuary. The name felt almost sacred, a testament to everything they had suffered and survived. Emily laughed and wept at once, the release of tension leaving her dizzy. Ash moved into her new home with characteristic wariness. For the first few days, she circled the enclosure's perimeter, testing every seam and shadow. But Emily noticed the difference. Ash's movements were less frantic, her posture more confident, her wildness tempered by an acceptance of safety. She could watch the sunrise from a high perch, stretch out in a patch of clover, or vanish into her den when the world outside grew too loud. The enclosure gave Ash the space to be wild, but with the protection Emily and Daniel had bled and sacrificed to provide. The new normal brought its own set of challenges. The legal oversight was constant. Wildlife officers visited monthly, inspecting records, examining Ash, and double-checking the security of the enclosure. At first, Emily braced herself at every knock, heart pounding with the old, familiar dread. But gradually, the tone shifted. Officers who had once seemed adversarial now offered cautious praise, admiring Ash's recovery, noting the thoroughness of the enclosure, nodding at Emily's meticulous logs. Trust, she realized, had to be built in both directions. The community's gaze, once harsh and suspicious, softened over time. Stories spread of the storm, the rescue in the ravine, the months of struggle. Some neighbors, moved by the persistence they witnessed, volunteered small acts of kindness, a bag of cat food left on the porch, a note of encouragement tucked under the door, a quiet offer to help with repairs after a windy night. Others simply let the matter drop, content to leave the past behind. The online furor faded, replaced by a trickle of questions from people curious about wildlife rescue and the reality of living alongside creatures not meant for domestication. Emily's days filled with new purpose. She joined forums and advocacy groups, sharing Ash's story and connecting with others who faced the same impossible choices. Sometimes she hosted small gatherings for curious neighbors, guiding them through the rescue center's process, explaining the difference between loving wildlife and owning it. She watched children press their faces to the enclosure's wire, eyes wide with awe and wonder. She taught them respect, patience, and the truth that some things cannot, and should not, be tamed. Ash thrived in her new home, strong and agile, never fully domesticated, but no longer desperate. She chose when to approach, when to disappear into the shadows, when to accept a treat, or simply watch from afar. Sometimes, in the cool twilight, Emily would sit outside the enclosure, knees pulled to her chest, and Ash would curl up nearby, close but always just out of reach. In those moments, Emily felt the meaning of what they had done, a love that asked nothing in return except the freedom to choose. Through it all, the hardships had left their mark. Debt still lingered, fatigue clung to Daniel's face, and Emily carried anxiety like an old injury, flaring up at the sound of a siren or the sight of an unfamiliar car on the street. But those fears no longer ruled their lives. They had learned that protecting something wild required more than good intentions. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to endure criticism and sacrifice for what was right. Over time, Ash Haven became more than a name on a permit. It was a living testament to the idea that true compassion is not about control, but about stewardship and respect. Emily found herself repeating that lesson, both to others and to herself. To love the wild was to defend its right to exist on its own terms, even if that meant letting go, even if it meant not being needed or wanted in return. On a cold, clear evening, as the stars blinked into life above the silent yard, Emily watched Ash melt into the shadows of her sanctuary. There was a fierce ache in her heart, a longing for the certainty of simpler times, and a gratitude for the complexity of what she now understood. She knew the fight was never really over, that every day would bring new challenges. But for now, wildness and safety coexisted, not perfectly, but honestly. And that, she realized, was enough. The news of Ash Haven's official recognition rippled outward, first through the neighborhood, then beyond the city limits. At first, it was just a small human interest piece in the local paper, a story tucked between political squabbles and weather forecasts, a wild bobcat rescued, an ordinary couple refusing to look away. But in an age hungry for hope, the story spread. Reporters called, bloggers wrote, photos circulated of Ash sunning herself on a high branch, while Emily watched nearby, cautious but content. Emails began arriving from strangers across the state, some seeking advice, others sharing stories of their own impossible rescues, a few just needing reassurance that compassion could survive in a world so often bent against it. Emily responded to each one, sometimes late at night, her words echoing what she had learned in the long, hard months that changed everything. Sometimes all you can do is care, and hold on, and keep fighting, even when the law and the world seem to push you back at every turn. Ash Haven found its rhythm as a small, unofficial sanctuary for wild creatures in need. Emily and Daniel worked within the law, but stretched its limits with creativity and sheer determination. The sanctuary grew slowly. A stray hawk with a broken wing one month, an orphaned opossum the next. Each animal brought its own challenges, each a reminder that saving something wild was always a risk, sometimes with heartbreak, sometimes with astonishing reward. What changed most, however, was the community. Where once there had been suspicion and complaint, now there was conversation. Parents brought children to peer through the fence at Ash, asking questions that Emily answered with patience and candor. Teachers reached out for guidance on building lesson plans around wildlife and compassion. Volunteers helped clear brush and plant native flowers along the fence line, eager to contribute, even in small ways, to something that felt meaningful and real. Emily learned to tell their story with honesty, never glossing over the hardship, never pretending the outcome was guaranteed. She spoke about the nights spent in fear, the money gone, the loneliness of standing against the grain. But she also told of the small miracles. The first time Ash slept through the night, without flinching at every noise. The note from a neighbor who'd once signed the petition, but now left bags of food by the gate. The moment Daniel, tired and muddy, had admitted he was proud, not just of Ash, but of Emily's courage and conviction. The story struck a chord, especially with those who'd faced their own crossroads, the choice to do nothing or to risk everything for something fragile and wild. Emily's words, often shared in talks or written online, always circled back to a single idea. True love for anything wild is a kind of letting go. You build, you protect, you give everything you have, but you never own. You can only create the conditions for trust and hope that one day the wild thing will choose to stay, not because it must, but because it's free. Through the winter, Ash grew into her new world. She remained a bobcat, not a pet, not fully tame, but a being with her own mind and choices. Some days she ignored the humans altogether, content to vanish into the brush and sleep on her high perch. Other days, she approached the fence when Emily was near, sitting quietly, the old wariness replaced by a steady, unblinking curiosity. Emily never forced her company. She learned the deep satisfaction of presence without possession, of love defined by respect and patience. The impact of Ash's story reached further than Emily could have imagined. A regional wildlife rescue group adopted her protocols for emergency care. Local officials, once her harshest critics, invited her to speak at council meetings about ethical rescue and responsible compassion. Children wrote letters, asking how they could help the animals around them. For every angry voice that called her reckless, there were 3 more who said, "I would have done the same." Late one spring evening, Emily sat on the back step, Daniel beside her, the air filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers and distant rain. Ash appeared on the far side of the enclosure, pausing to look back at the house. The golden light made her fur glow, her body limned with all the wildness that had never been tamed. For a moment, Emily saw not just the kitten she'd pulled from the roadside, but the countless lives, animal and human, touched by one act of reckless, necessary mercy. She felt gratitude swell inside her, mingling with a bittersweet ache. The scars on her hands, the lines on Daniel's face, the debt and fear and fatigue, all of it had been transformed, forged into something stronger and brighter. She understood now that every act of care, every moment of courage, resonated far beyond its origin. The echo of kindness could carry through a community, rippling outward, changing minds and healing hearts in ways she could never predict. As dusk settled, Emily offered one last quiet thought to the world, the lesson at the center of everything. Sometimes, love means letting go, so the other can freely choose to come back. She posted the words online, a simple call to anyone who had faced their own impossible choices. Have you ever struggled between holding on and letting go? Share your story below, you're not alone. In that invitation, Emily found peace. Her story and Ash's belong to everyone now. A reminder that wildness and compassion can exist together, that courage is sometimes just refusing to turn away, and that the truest homes are the ones we build not just for ourselves, but for others who need sanctuary too.